Hello, students in Comp 3077 online, and welcome to Week 9. Also, welcome to my Week 9 Thursday section in the fall 2025 semester, because I am lecturing this one live in class because my voice has been a little rough all week. You may be listening to this a year or two later, and that's kind of not relevant, but this is a good case. It covers a lot of stuff. We're going to pick up where we left off with tables. And everything we do that has to do with calculations or formulas or any kind of mathematical, anything with an equal sign in the context of the table, we are going to use those structured references that we used last week and learned when we learned our tables case. So we're going to keep doing that. And the key takeaway from last week, which I'm going to go right into it this week, if you need to go back and review that, you should look at the Week 8 video and you can use the timestamps, is when you need to use structured references in a table, and Sam is asking you to do that, the easiest way to do it is just to click on the cell, not have to type anything in. Okay, so most of the steps that we're doing, where we're using calculations from the table, we'll be using that. We're going to do some lookup functions again. We're going to do an if function with nesting. We're going to use if with or and an if error function. So lots of cool stuff in here we're covering. And pivot tables and pivot charts. So it's a bit of a whopper of a case. It won't be quite as short as last week, although it's not going to be super long. So let's get into it. I have the case open. Week 9 details are always good to check too in FOL content, just to see what we're covering here, which I already covered in the PowerPoint slides anyway. But there's a little more information in there, as there usually is. And there's some extra information on if versus the ifs function. Okay, two different versions. And there's also if x. And there's different versions of if. So we're going to encounter that in this case to some degree. This is more, I think, sticking with if. And it's just, this video is just giving you the option to explore another way to do it. Okay, so let's get right into the case. I'm going to grab the instruction file. I'm going to grab the start file. And we'll get them renamed and opened up. My computer is a little slow, so I'm just going to pause it for a second here. Okay, I've got both the files downloaded. I'm going to change the name as always. Same thing every week. There were still people on the first test who had trouble with that. You are not going to get help from me on the second test if you have trouble with that, or whomever your professor is. So let's open up the instructions, open up the start file, and let's get moving. All right, good. So we've got both files opened up. I've already clicked Enable Editing, and we're going to jump right into step 1 here. So Vanessa Perkins is the project manager for Blackstone Landscaping, based in Rhode Island. Provides a range of landscaping designs. As usual, the boss is asking you for help. You could assume maybe at this point in Week 9, you're probably an Excel consultant, right? So you're going to switch to the employees worksheet. So let's jump over here. It is the first worksheet in the workbook. I know last week we were kind of jumping around a little bit. We're going right to the employee sheet. And we did deal with lookup functions in Week 3. Someone has already created a lookup function here. It's not X lookup like we had in Week 3. It's actually Vlookup. And I can show you that quickly, but we're not going to mess with it. What we're going to do is an if error, just like we did in Week 3. So this is a bit of a review. You take the function that's already created. You don't mess with it. You take it, you cut it, and you put it inside the IFerror, and then you can have a customized message show up in case there's something wrong with what it's trying to look up. So in cell B4, so we're going to go to B4, there is a lookup function. And if we click the FX, I'm preemptively telling you guys, don't mess with the function, but you can at least click at it and look at it. So generally speaking, the thing you're looking up is always like right above it, right next to it, something like that. And in this case, it is right above it, right? So it's looking for this employee ID in this section of the Excel file. So what you have here is actually a structured reference for the section it's looking in, which makes it automatically absolute. So if you were to drag that down and you needed absolute referencing, I mentioned this last week in the video that by default, it makes that absolute, but you don't need it anyway. There's only one function there. It's looking for the employee's name, which is in the second column of the table. and it's looking for an exact match. So where it says range lookup. So it's just a VLOOKUP they already made for you. But what you're going to do is not mess with the function at all. You can cancel out of that. You're going to take the function after the equals sign, the entirety of it, and cut it. You can right-click cut, or you can Control X or Command X on your keyboard. And as soon as you do that, you're going to start inserting an IFerror function. And as soon as you type out the first 4 or 5 characters, IFerror, you can double click on it. And as soon as you get IFerror set up in there, you're going to click on the FX and go into the function wizard. Because, wait, what? Does that not work that way? I'm glad this is happening while I'm recording. IFerror. Okay. FX. There. What did I click on? I must have clicked over to the left a bit. As soon as you create the parenthesis for any function, when you click the FX, it will take you into the function wizard. Of course, I've always told you guys, you never need that if it's a single input function, like the date style functions that are single input, sum, min, max, average, all those. Count is very simple too, or count A is a single input. So this is a double input because the value is whatever you want in the cell, and then in case there's an error with what you have in the cell, you can give it a custom message. So now that thing you just cut, you're going to Control V or right-click paste the entire thing into that first box. Notice it doesn't have an equal sign. If you happen to have cut the equal sign, it will not populate over here on the right for you, and you want to make sure it does. So if you don't see anything on the right, it's probably just because you have the equal sign in there. Just get rid of that, and it should populate for you that it's Alexandros Miller. So you've literally done nothing at this point but copy and paste into another function. You did have to type out the function, but you did this exact thing in week 3. Now, this is the point in the course where I start to catch students that have basically just been cloning actions the entire time and not really slowly going through it and making sure they understand what they're actually doing. So if what I just did was feeling very difficult to you or overarching, I am going to do it one more time, only because it's the first step and I want to start you guys slowly. You need to start practicing before the final test. I'm just saying that. And I'm not picking on my section that I'm lecturing in right now. I'm just generally saying this stuff. This is the kind of stuff I say in the videos. So I'm going to cancel out of that. And we're going to take a look at it one more time. As soon as we click on B4, you can see there is a result of a function in B4. That is the person's name that it looked up in this table, in the second column, found the ID, and returned the name. I want this entire function to be nested inside of an IFerror. All an IFerror function does is take something that's already working and gives you an alternative message. So right now, if I were to have put, like this is the idea, like you type in the employee ID, and let's say I typed in a bunch of 8s. There is no employee ID by that, so it just says NA. The idea of the IFerror is to explain to the person who typed the employee ID in that you actually did something wrong there. That's the point of the IFerror. So I'm going to undo that. That's not part of the step. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the entire function without the equal sign. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to type in IFerror, or just double click. As soon as it starts auto-completing it and you get the parenthesis, you hit the FX, and then I'm going to paste it. That's it. That's the point I want you guys to all be at. If this isn't populating there, it's because you included the equal sign, in which case you can arrow over and get rid of the equal sign. In the next box, click your mouse into the next box, is where you're going to put this custom message. So instead of NA, N/A, it wants it to say invalid employee ID. Okay, the quotes are not to be included here. It's putting the quotes in there to remind you that all text, if you're using it inside of a function, is generally to be in quotes. So if you want it to be invalid employee ID, copy the text. Don't copy the quotes. If you copy the quotes, it might not work, and that's because of different language settings on computers. The characters might be slightly different. Just copy the text, invalid employee ID, or type it in. But I mean, it's always risky, you know, if you don't want to get typos, you can just copy it. And then put the quotes around it. Notice as soon as I put the quotes around it, then the text populates and it shows it there. If the quotes aren't in there, it's nothing but text. Now, depending on your language settings, it may have worked fine if you copy and pasted the quotes. Anytime you're putting text into an Excel function, I would always type the quotes in. It's going to be better that way. That way, there's any indiscrepancy between the way the quote is typed versus the quote you copied that it might not recognize as a quote is gone. You just type it in. And when you click OK, it looks exactly the same. It doesn't look like anything has changed. But now, if you want to test it, and don't leave it like this because you'll end up getting it wrong. If you type in a bunch of 8s and hit enter, now it says invalid employee ID. So that's the whole idea of an if error. And that was a lot of time to spend in a step we already did in week 3. So let's move on to the next step. So step number 2, Vanessa needs to complete the employees table in the range A1. So obviously there's a bunch of blank columns here that aren't done yet. And she's going to get that done. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to do a standard if function. And you're going to try and figure out if the years are greater than 1. Not greater than or equal to, just greater. That doesn't say at least 1. If the wording said at least 1, it would be greater than or equal to. So you're going to start with an if function that asks, have they been working here more than 1 year? That's it. So all you got to do is go to the cell that shows how many years they've been working there, ask Excel inside of an if function if it's greater than 1, and then your answers are really simple in this case. They're just yes and no. And like we learned last week, if you're in the context of a table doing this, especially if you're using structured references, although it would work, I think it'd autofill anyway. If the settings in your computer, in your operating system allow that, you would have had to go into Excel actually and change it not to autofill in a table. It should autofill for you and you shouldn't have to. So we are going to G8, and in G8, we're going to do an if function. So yes, under the formulas tab, if is under logical. But I think it's just as fast, if not faster, to just go equals if, type your parenthesis, and click the FX. Because you're not going to type it all out. We're in week 9, you already know. We are not professors in this course that are instructing students that it's better to learn how to type out all the characters inside of an Excel function. It is not. You don't need to do that because Excel will do it for you if you just pick up the cells. So the first thing is testing how many years they've been there. Do not type in is C8, which is where the years are in that row, greater than 1. If you type that in, it will mark you wrong because it asked for structured references. Even though in the real world, when you do it this way, it will work exactly the same way and it'll be fine. They want you to do the version of C8 that is the structured reference. And all you have to do to get that is click on the cell. So whatever row you're in, click on the years cell and then go greater than 1. Should be just like that. If they have been there for more than a year, you have the word yes. If not, you have the word no. And you'll notice here with an if function, you don't even have to type the quotes in. It will complete the quotes for you as soon as you click outside the box you're in, if it knows it's text. And that's the function. And as soon as I click it, I already know it's going to autocomplete for me. And that's step number 2. So we did learn that in week 3 as well. It's just a standard if function. In fact, I think the one in week 3 was actually more involved than that. So we're going back to that and we're learning it a bit more. And now we're going to actually nest it a little bit in some other stuff. So click OK. So I was just working with my class live and I was just explaining to them. Again, I went back and reopened this just to show them this, because a couple of my students were looking at this going, how did you get that? What's with the square brackets and the at symbol? So this structured reference, that's what this is the same as C8. And if I put C8 in there and clicked OK, it would autofill again with C8 as the reference. And in the real world, that would be totally fine. But Sam is asking for a structured reference. And all you have to do to get the structured version of C8, if it's in a table, so it's in an Excel table, is click on it. So what this is saying is it's saying in square brackets, which means you're in the table, you're at the years column in that row. So you're in the years column for that row. And that's this structured reference version of C8. But you don't ever have to learn to type that out. You guys are fine. That's all you got to do is click on it. And when you click OK, it autofills automatically. So whenever you have a table, and this isn't the best example because there's only 22, 23 records or so, it'd be you could see the benefits of it even more if there were like thousands of records here. Because all you have to do with the table when you figure out what calculation you want is you do it in the top row, and then it auto-completes every time, whether you structured references or not. It should auto-complete. So let's go to the next one. And we're on to step number 3 here. So that was just an if, right? That was just a basic if function. So I'm going to complicate it a little bit here. But it's not. I want you guys to recognize how simple this is. So if you understand in an if function like the one we just did, that all you're doing is asking a question. Whether or not this is greater than, equal to, does it equal this? Is it less than or equal to, about a cell. What I'm about to show you is that you can actually have multiple questions in the logical test field. You can have up like hundreds of them using 2 other functions. There's 2 different versions of ways you can do this. If you have a situation where you're going to ask questions where 1, 2, 3, 4, like 4 different questions would qualify them as a landscaping construction job, you can use what's called an OR function and ask the questions and set them up first, and then cut and paste that into the if function as your logical test, and then just put in your 2 answers. If you have a situation like we're going to do here, where multiple versions of questions would qualify them, but they would all have to be true, you would use something called the AND function. So I'm going to do these 2, but we're not, even though these are both ultimately going to be if functions, we're not going to start with the if function itself. So step number 3 says you're going to use if and OR. And it wants to figure out, wherever it says determine, whether the value in the years column is greater than or equal to 3. So this time it says, or it could say at least 3. And whether the value in the average eval column is greater than or equal to 7. So this is, I guess, how their site has been evaluated and whether it's worth being, I don't know what the criteria is there. And use structured references for both. So as soon as they say OR, so here's what matters with OR. If any of the questions are true, it will fall into the true value for an if function. When we go to do the AND in the next step, they all have to be true, which hence the definition of the words OR and AND. So first thing we're going to do is build the questions, and you don't do it in the if. If you do it in the if, then you have to type it all out. What I teach people to do is do it first in the OR function, and then cut it and put it into the if. So go equal, the function is OR, and it's not under logical, but I mean, it's 2 letters. Type it out, put your parenthesis in, and hit the FX. So this allows you to put all these questions in. You can have, here, if I keep clicking and tabbing down, like it'll keep letting me do like 5 at a time. We don't need more. 255 conditions. You can have 255 questions. We only have 2. So this is going to be quite easy. So we're going to first figure out if the years are greater than or equal to 3. So same way we did it last time with the table. You only have to do it in the top row. Click on years and ask if it's alligator hungry or equal to 3. That's it. Then click into the box and click into the next question. If you get into a situation where you started the next test, but you were still in the same box, just delete the stuff and clean it up and do it again. So we got to click into the next box, and the next question is going to be, I forget what it is already. Is the average eval greater than 7, greater than or equal to 7 again, greater than or equal to? So this time, we're going to go back to the table, and we're going to ask if the average eval is greater than or equal to, once again, 7. And stare at this for a little bit, make sure it looks like mine. Again, don't worry about the fact that this looks, a little more complicated than it maybe, like that has double words, so they have brackets around it. There's additional brackets in there. Just just click on the cell. That's all you have to do to get the structured reference. And then you click OK, and you're going to get a bunch of trues and falses because you haven't put it into an if function yet and identified what your answers should be. Because if you don't use the if function, it'll just automatically default to true and false. So now, just like we did at the beginning with the the if error. I keep thinking nested if because it's something I want to remember to show you before we move on to the latter step after we do the next step. Because it's not in the case, but nested if is an awesome skill and I want to just show you guys how to do it. So I'll announce that in the video that if you don't want to see me do this and learn something awesome, you can switch right to step 5 and not have to do it. But I'm hoping you guys will actually watch it. Sorry, I'm bouncing all over the place here. Back to here. Never apologize when you're doing a presentation because 99% of the time people won't know you did anything wrong. Little trick there. See how I just said sorry because I was showing you different screens, but most of you that are watching the video are using the timestamps anyway. So now you will take this portion of what's in the formula bar that is working great, and it's just in the top bar, right? You only ever have to do the top row. As soon as we change the formula in H8, which is the top row of where the data starts below the headers, which is row 8, everything else will auto change with it. It'll auto fill. So I'm going to take the OR function that is working the way I want it to. It's showing me a bunch of true and falses. And remember with OR, both questions, either question can be true for it to fall into the true category. That's why you see a bunch of trues there. I'm going to cut that, and I'm going to start an if function right away. So do what I'm doing. Go into the formula bar. I'm going to do this one more time, okay? Go into the formula bar. I'm going to escape. Highlight just the function without the equal sign. Cut it. Type an if function in. Start your parenthesis. And then paste it right here in the top box. If it does not auto-populate true, you accidentally cut the equal sign and you need to get rid of it. Okay, so from this point, now it's just like an if function. The only difference is you've got 2 questions in here. And if you could figure out how simple it was to build an OR function, you could just type it out. But because Sam is asking for structured references, I wouldn't advise that. Because the OR and the AND functions, and we're about to do the AND, are just the name of the function with the parenthesis, and then this cell is greater than that. That cell is equal to this. That cell, and you just put a comma in between each question. That's all it is. And then the answers in the context of this test are very simply, once again, yes and no. And I always type them out with the capital Y and the capital N, but Sam will still mark it right if it's not capital. It doesn't matter. So now you click OK, and it refills all those same cells with the updated formula, which is now the if function. And now we're going to go to the next step and do the same exact thing, but it's going to be with an AND function. So literally, you're doing something that's almost identical. Obviously, the questions are different, but you're doing 2 questions using a function. You're going to take the function you built with those 2 questions, cut it, paste it into an if function, put your answers for the if function, true or false, which are yes or no again, I believe. And then you're done. So I'm going to go through this one a little more quickly. So for step number 4, we're doing an if with AND. And we're checking to see if the years column is greater than or equal to 4 and whether the average score column is greater than or equal to 7. So if I know landscaping, and I do have 2 friends that ran landscaping businesses for years, I could only guess that if a landscaper actually made this file, these are evaluations and some kind of score program for the client and how easy they are to deal with. I don't know. I'm not, but it's irrelevant. You're just trying to do a SAM case, so we're testing these things out. So this is going to use the AND function. And again, it's under the logical category. You can see it right at the top here, but it's a 3. Just type it out. Equals AND, parentheses, if I could type, oh my God, AND, parenthesis, hit the FX, ask the questions. First question is, are years greater than or equal to 4? Make sure you get the greater than and the equal to. So we have the and function. Everybody should have this up. We set this up just like the or function. It looks exactly the same. It's just with this particular one, every question has to be true for it to fall into the true. Hence the definition of the word and. Where or, it's this or this or this. Any of those could make it true. So we are going to click on years in the top row and ask if it's greater than or equal to 4. As soon as you get that one built, click into the next box. And the next one we're checking, we're going to ask if the average score is, and you know what I find interesting is throughout this case, and I haven't even really brought this up, they're giving you the text for what the structured reference should look like. As if you can't just click on the cell. They're almost encouraging you to type it out, which you are not going to do because it's, what have I taught you since the very beginning of this course? The most efficient and quickest way you can do things with a computer application are always the best. Why would you do things that make it take longer? And yes, there's a lot of AI now, and there's I mean, even the quick analysis tool in terms of Excel that we've used is technically AI. But there is AI built into Excel. There's Copilot that will suggest things to you in terms of how to complete it. But you're not going to go into ChatGPT and have it build an Excel file for you. And eventually that may happen, but if you don't understand how to make adjustments to it, this is one of my things about Excel. This is my favorite class to teach. I'm a marketing prof. I love sales. Like I also sell real estate, but Excel is still my favorite thing to teach because I don't think it's ever going to go away. We're always going to need this to organize data. So I'm going back here and I'm checking if the average eval, no, that was the first one. No, average score is greater than or equal to 7, which happens to be the same as the test we did with average eval. And they're probably doing that just to see if you get confused and put the wrong thing in. So make sure here that you check this time in the F column, which is average score, and make sure you click on it because you need the structured reference, is greater than or equal to 7. And as soon as you do those two, you are ready to click OK. And then you should have the same true and falses that I have. And you're not going to have to scroll through it as long as your settings aren't set that you need to scroll through to do autofill. Immediately go up to the formula bar in the same cell you're already sitting in, highlight everything from the equal sign over to the right, right click, cut, and type out an if function. Start your parenthesis, open up the if, right click, paste. It's exactly like the or function, except the use of the function and instead of or means all the questions have to be true for it to fall into true. And then what are the answers we are going to have? Once again, they are yes and no. So a lot of people that use Excel consider this stuff to be very high level. Once you learn an if function, you can do and or no problem. And where this comes up a lot, you'll see this a lot in the real world, is with shipping. So shipping will have all these classifications for weight. And you could end up having like 15 different questions testing the weight. Well, if it is like this, then they have to use this kind of box, and you could have all this stuff. If functions with and or are great for shipping calculations. And which would bring me to my next example, which is an example I'm going to give you that isn't in the case. So I want to show you something quickly that just in the context of how it might work if you needed to nest an if and an if. So what we did here was we did a basic if function, had a question, and then you can provide an answer to that question with the true and false values. This one had multiple questions using the or function. This one had multiple questions using the and function. And from this point forward, we're not going to deal with any more logical test functions. We're going to get into a little bit of different stuff with pivot tables and pivot charts, which is great stuff. So I want to show you one more thing that is not in the case. I repeat, this is not a step. You do not need to do this. You can use the timestamp and skip to the next step if you want. I'd rather you didn't. I want to show you how to do a nested if. So over here in this cell, just as an example, I'm going to show you how to do a nested if. So here we have an if that has multiple questions in the first field. You can have up to 255. You can also ask a question, and if the answer isn't true, you can ask another question in the false field with another if function. And you can do that up to 255 times. So this stuff can get pretty heavy. So just using this file as an example, because I've already talked about how shipping would be a better example. But let's say that, what's the highest years in here? And I'd already thought this up ahead of time. So nobody's been with you for more than 6 years. But let's pretend that anybody who's been with you 5 years or more, they automatically qualify for garden design. So you wouldn't need to do these two tests. They would just automatically qualify. So what you do is you start an if function. Okay, here's an if function. And again, this is just an example. If you're watching the video right now, I'm showing you something cool that I want you to learn, but this is not part of the case. So you can do this with me and then just delete it and go on to step 6 or 5. What is it? Go on to step 5. Okay, so start an if function, go in here and check in the years column to see if they have been with you for 5 years or more. So at least 5 years. So this would be greater than or equal to 5. And if they had been with you for 5 years or more, you could have a true value. It could be yes, or it could be garden design automatic or something, so that you know what they qualified for that because of how long they've been with you. And if they haven't, then you still need to do those tests from before. Right? So what you would then do is you'd leave it blank and you'd go in here, you'd in another cell somewhere, you'd build those additional questions and you'd go and take them, which here you have this and function built into here. This is a little convoluted, the example I'm showing you, but, or let's just say there was only one question. Let's just say at this point you needed to check something else to see if they qualified for garden design. And the only thing you had to check was whether or not they had been with you for at least 2 years, let's say, okay? So what you do is you click OK and you leave it blank. I'm not going to assume that you've built it somewhere else. The best way to do this is to leave it blank and go inside the parenthesis after the answer to your first true value, which you did have, because if it's true, then you're good. But if it's not, you need to ask another question. And this is where that shipping comparison comes in, where I'm talking about how useful if is for shipping. Because if it's not, then you have to check the dimensions, and then you have to check something else. And then you have to. So here you add a comma. The reason you add a comma is because there's always a comma after each of the values, but you just left it blank. But if you add the comma, then you can go into the formulas tab and start a new if. That's how you do a nested if. Or you could also just go comma, start a new if, and then go into the two parentheses that you just typed and go in here, right? You could do it that way. You can't do the single parenthesis thing because you're inside of a function already. That's why the easier way to do it, I think, is to just add the comma, and for a change, because I'm always telling you to type it out, use the formulas tab, go to if, and now you're going to ask, hey, is this greater than or equal to 2? And if it is greater than or equal to 2, then yes, they do qualify. But if they haven't been with us for 2 years, then we're too busy doing garden designs. They're not going to be able to get a garden design job until they've been loyal customers for longer. And now I would scroll that through because I'm not in the table. It didn't autocomplete. So you can see there's a couple people that have been with us for 5 years or more, and they're garden design automatic. So that's a nested if. It's an if inside an if. And you can do that 255 times. It's crazy. And the previous case in week 9 that we had in this course for the last 2.5 years, because we redo this course fairly often. This course gets redone every time there's any major upgrade to Microsoft Office. This one might last a little longer because now that we're in 365, the consistency of how it's going to look and stuff should stay the same for a while. But that's an estimative. And that was just for your information purposes only. We have now officially finished the stuff on this worksheet, I believe. We're going to switch to the landscaping worksheet and start into step number 5. So let's go. So step 5, we are on the landscaping worksheet. We do have a table here. If we click into it, we can see there's a table. It's named projects. It's got all the typical table tools. It wants us to contains landscaping projects pivot table. Switch to landscaping pivot table. Oh, sorry. We got to go to landscaping pivot table. I just went to the next worksheet by default. It did make it clear we're supposed to go to landscaping pivot table. So go to landscaping pivot table worksheet, which, by the way, is based on this table. That's how you make pivot tables and pivot charts. You can only make them if you already have a table. And what pivot table and pivot charts are they are a more interactive version where you can kind of move things in and out. And we haven't made one of these yet, even though this is already made. So for the first example of this, we're just going to show you how this works. So switch to the landscaping. And what we're going to do here is display the pivot table field list and then remove the average of the total projects fields from the values area. So what's going on with a pivot table is that it's based on the table and all the stuff that's in the table, and then you can drag whatever you want in and out of it. But right now I don't see the field list. Right now I'm not even in the table itself to get the field list. So if I click anywhere in the table, I do get this stuff that comes up, and the field list should come up on the right. In the case it doesn't, you would go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab, and there is a button here for field list, which would turn it on and off. But your first step, which you should already know, even though we haven't had a lot of experience with pivot tables, is that you see something in the worksheet that is clearly some sort of functionality type of stuff in Excel, and you don't see those toolbars in the ribbon, like those tabs. You need to click in the thing, and then they're there. And then in the case this didn't show up, you would go there to turn it on. And now that it is showing up, we are going to remove the average of the total projects field from values. So this is how easy it is to make adjustments in pivot tables. Okay, under values, the average of total projects is one of the things we put in here. And to get things added in there, you can just turn them on and off by checking them off here, or you drag them in there. So we don't want this in there, so we can drag it back out, or we could just uncheck it. Okay, but if we unchecked it, it would remove both of them because we had two versions of it in there. So now that it's checked, right, it shows the total. But if I wanted another one in there, I'd have to drag it in again, and then I can make it average. So under field settings, I go to average instead of sum, and then it's back in there. So this is getting into a little more, I'm just showing you how to make adjustments to this stuff, okay? So right now, we're just gonna get rid of that, so just drag it out. So that's that step so far. I believe there was something else in there. Move the region field so that it appears as the second field in the rows area to make the pivot table easier to interpret. So under rows, you want to put region, and we're not going to leave it in columns. We're going to drag it from columns and put it in here. So this is just showing you how pivot tables work. And there's no right or wrong answer. You can pretty much just move stuff around until you feel that it's easier to look at. And maybe in the context of a meeting, it might work a little better. So this is obviously showing you, without having to do subtotals, how easily it is to break them up into by building type. Where if you look at the whole table, it's just not that simple, right? So it's another way also to avoid having to do subtotals, which we learned last week. And that's step 5. It's just those two changes in the table. That's it. We got rid of the average for total projects, and we moved region from columns over to here. Step 6, Vanessa wants another way to compare landscaping projects by building type, but not by region. So collapse the outline in the landscaping projects pivot table to display the building type names and to hide the regions. So we're still in the same pivot table. So if we click in the pivot table and go here, we are on landscaping projects, yes. And what she wants us to do, so what they're talking about, and just the way they worded the question, I knew there was another way to do it. So I actually just paused my video and looked it up. So to collapse the fields, so you just see the outline and not all the data, I would just hit the minus buttons in each of the fields. And that accomplishes what they're asking you to do. But if I undo each of those, if you click on any item in any of the fields in that column and go to expand collapse, there is an option to collapse entire field. So, and I just learned that, and I've expanded and collapsed stuff in pivot tables many times. I never knew you could do it that way. So that is a little bit quicker, and you know I like the quick ways. So that would be that. And then it says insert a pivot chart. So pivot chart will be clustered column. We're going to worry about the other stuff after in a second. So anytime you want a pivot chart to be inserted based on a pivot table, sitting anywhere in the pivot table, under pivot table analyze, you just simply go to pivot chart. You don't go insert chart. Although I think if you go to insert, you can do pivot chart from here. No, they took that away. I don't think you can. Yeah, so you got to be here, and you go sitting anywhere in the table, pivot chart. Yeah, just clustered column. It usually chooses what Sam wants by default. Click OK, and you already know what's coming. We're going to do left corner, right corner, like we always do. Don't be touching the grid lines. So insert a pivot chart, clustered column, resize, reposition. Upper left is A12, lower right is F25. You guys have done this enough. I don't have to spend too much time on this. Grab in the middle white space area, go A12. You can kind of get it right in there, but don't touch the grid lines. Okay. Lower right, F25. So obviously we're nowhere near F, so go down to F, and it's nice that we're right by the column, the row numbers, I should say. And you can go over a bit more. It doesn't have to look exactly like the picture. You just got to make sure you're in those two cells without touching the grid lines. Change the pivot chart colors to be monochromatic palette 12 to coordinate with the pivot table. So now that you're on the chart, you have pivot chart stuff up here. If you click back on the pivot table, that's pivot table stuff. So sitting on the chart, go to design and go to colors. This is, you're not changing the theme, the colors, and it's monochromatic 12, palette 12. So monochromatic 12, so you're gonna have to scroll down here. Is that 12? 9? It's way down there. Yeah, you could see it. As soon as you see it, you know it's the same colors matching. And that's it. So that's how easy it is to make a chart from a pivot table. And that's it for step 6. Now she needs to concentrate on property maintenance and landscaping construction projects. So use the slicer. So we figured out how to do slicers last week with tables. It's the same in pivot tables, except instead of from the table, so go here. Instead of from the table tab, you're doing the slicer from here. So insert slicer. And it works the same way. So I demonstrated this last week with the slicers we did in the table. It's already made for you. You haven't moved it around or done anything to it. You're just going to slice according to only property maintenance and landscaping construction projects. So just uncheck multiple and garden design. Or here, wait. Check landscaping construction. Hold down your control key. Check property maintenance. That's one way to do it. You can also go in here. No, sorry. Is that the only way to do it? Wow. Hold down the control key. Check the other one. Yeah, I guess it is. The slicer with the tables, I think you can click on the filter and then, yeah, so just, you got to click on them and then it's like highlighting multiple selections, right? So once you pick the first one, control key, click the next one. You can see there's quite a few, but those are the only two you need. Okay, and then that's it. Now we're switching to another worksheet. Okay, let's save our files. Control S before we go on to the last worksheet here. So I Control S. Let's see what we're doing on this one. So number 8, switch to the Recreation Hospitality worksheet, which includes Recreational Hospital list. So this is a function I don't use very often. It's basically just telling you what they see in a table at a certain point. But it's not, it's only relevant if you have a big, huge, gigantic table and you want to get back to the index function. You want to get back to the beginning of the table to see what's going on. So Vanessa wants to display statistics in cells B15, 17. So in B15, use the index function to display the value in the first row and first column of the, so this is probably one of the simplest steps in the case. So go to B15. Don't worry about B17. I don't know why they're bringing that up in step 8 when you're not going to do it till step 9. But let's go to B15. We're using a function called index. Now, this will be in, I think this is also in lookup. Yeah, it is. But you don't, it's never that important to know the categories as long as you know how easy it is to just bring up. It's more important when you don't know exactly what functions you want. You might want to try some stuff in here. So we're going to go to index function. We're going to put it in, start a parenthesis, hit the FX. So you guys have been used to this for a while. We are not doing the multiple reference row, column, area number. We're just doing the first version, array, row number, column number. So you can leave it, check to that, click OK. And the array is the table itself, and it's the first column and the first row. So if you highlight the table with the headers, you'll see it comes up as recreation, hospitality, and showing all data. If you highlight just the data, it comes up as just the name of the table. And that's the correct way to do this. So it's the same way we do structured references. Once it sees that you're in a table, it will make a reference to the row and the column in that table. If you highlight all the data in the table below the headers, it just names the table. If you highlight the headers, it would still work and give you the right answer, but Sam will mark it wrong. So by highlighting just the data, that is the way Sam wants you to do it. It will pick up the table, which is recreation, hospitality. First row, first column, that is the entire function. So what it's going to return is what's in the first row and first column of the table. Not the header, but the first row, and because the first row and column of the table is the first cell under the first header. The header is just the header. It's not technically part of the data. It's just identifying the data. So I'm going to open that back up again so you guys can pause the video and look at it to make sure you have the same thing I have. If you don't have this here, it's because you highlighted the headers. Okay, step number 9. The other cell, it said it wants you to do some stats in. So, and these are statistical functions. I call them database functions sometimes because they're based on a table of data, but they're also statistical functions. We did something like this last week. So we know how sum works. Sum will add up everything in the range that you tell it to sum up. If you sum if, you can actually use the data in a table to choose a range, but sum it up only if it meets the criteria in another column. This is actually a really cool function. So it wants you to sum if, with structured references, the number of projects completed in each region with the garden design service. So it only wants to know how many projects were garden designed. So go to B17 and choose sum if. Well, how do I find that? Well, it's actually under more functions statistical, and it's down under S for sum if. But I mean, why not just type it out? This is what I keep telling you guys over and over again. Why not? Hey, it's not there. Oh, it's under math. That's right, math. Sorry, but this is why I don't bother with that. Like I'm like looking around for it. We know what we want to do. We know it's sum if. Just start typing it out, And it's there. Double click it. Go in here. Okay, what's your range? So what are you summing up? So you're summing up all the projects that were garden designed. So you're summing up total projects, okay? So your sum range is this. Highlight all the data under the total projects header. It should say recreation hospitality total projects. Wait. Sum range. Yeah, hang on. Hang on, I do that every time. That's the range you're adding up, which I just said out loud was your sum range. This actually goes here. Okay, the first thing is the range for the criteria you're trying to sum up. So everything under service that is, in quotes, garden design. And every garden design it finds, it's going to sum up in that row where it found a garden design from total projects. You just have to read what field you're in. So I'm going to go backwards and clear those out and show you how to get all that again. So the range where you're looking for the garden design projects is all the data underneath service. You don't include the, see how it put it in there for you? Because it knows you're in the table and it knows it's the service column, all data. Recreation and hospitality table, everything in service. What are we looking for in service? Garden design. You want to make sure it's spelled correctly. Put it in quotes. And once it finds the garden designs, where are we going to add up how many of them there are? Highlight all the data under total projects. And now when I click OK, there's a total of 55 out of all these, which is obviously a lot more than 55, that are specifically garden design. So it's a powerful function. It's simple, but it does the job. And if you want to make sure that's correct, you can always scroll down and look at the answers in the final there. You can see it's 55. Okay, and that was number 9. Okay, so number 10, we are going to make one of these pivot tables. And you probably knew this was coming because we're having you manipulate and adjust all these things in pivot tables. And just like the pivot chart we made that you can't make unless you have a pivot table, you can't make a pivot table unless you have a table, an Excel table. So one is based on the other, and the same thing, just like it was with the chart. So we are going to make a pivot table here, and it's going to be based on the recreational hospital. She asks you to create a pivot table. On a new worksheet, create a recommended pivot table based on the recreational hospitality table. So the one we were just in, we were doing those functions. So in this table, sitting anywhere in the table, you're going to go to table design and you're going to go to insert a pivot table here, summarize with pivot table. You can also do this from the insert tab. And if you're in the table, this won't be grayed out. You'll be able to make it from a table or you choose the table. But I always tell people it's better when you're in these objects that are built in Excel based on things they're doing in Excel and you get a new tab, you should be working from that tab. So summarize with pivot table. And automatically, it already asked you, make it a new worksheet. That is the default. You can also make it in the same worksheet, and choose the cell. We're going to make a new worksheet, and that's the table we're making it from. So click OK. And it should, by default, name it. Usually it does, actually. No, because we haven't made any new pivot tables in here. It will name it pivot table something. And then you can choose to name it according to the table it was made from or whatever you want. Let's see if the instructions identify anything about that. So it says, use for the name of the worksheet containing the pivot table. So you actually don't have to name the pivot table. You're just naming the worksheet. So I would kind of scoot down and do this right away. Okay, so go back here and go to the sheet. It does not say to move the sheet anywhere or place it anywhere else in the workbook. So you should accept the default location and simply put that in the name field. And then you can click back in the pivot table. If you happen to click off the pivot table, you're going to think everything's gone. It's not. Just click back in the pivot table. So again, you can also name the pivot table, but it did not require you to do that. So you can ignore that. Don't worry about that for now. Let's just get it set up the way they want it set up, which is, I know they wanted July. So they want the sum of July by service. So, and the Mac hint is actually helpful for everybody, even if you're on a PC. So to do this, you're just going to put service in the row areas field and July in values, and it should automatically default to be sum of. So service will be in rows. July is the sum of July for values. So you've got that so far. And they also want you to apply, and that's it for now. And we've already renamed the worksheet, so they want you to make it light green. So everything, like tables, like charts, you always have these different styles you can use. This particular pivot table is going to be style medium 13. And it's going to match the rest of the workbook. Keep things consistent here. So sitting anywhere in the pivot table, we're going to go to pivot table design. And medium 13, we're going to go down to the medium category. And we're going to choose 13 right here. Light green pivot style, medium 13. Looking good so far. That's number 10. Number 11, let's add some more stuff to the pivot table. So let's get it customized and doing the stuff we want it to do. So add some more details, add a filter. Put total projects in the values area below sum of July. So underneath sum of July, we're going to put total projects in there as well. And we are also going to add region to the rows area and put it below service. So let's get region right underneath service. Looking good. And we're going to add a filter. We're going to filter by project type. So add project type to filters. Project type filters. And do they say to filter anything there? Add project field to filters area. They don't have you filtering anything yet. So finally, change display of subtotals to show subtotals at the bottom of the group. And I think they're at the top right now. So this is also under design, which you should still be sitting on from when you change the style. So there's some different stuff you can adjust here in the way the pivot table looks over on the left side. Go subtotals, show subtotals at bottom of group. Check that off. You can see it's now moved them down to the bottom. And on to step 12. Vanessa also wants to focus on data for new projects only and to display the records for garden design. Filter the pivot table to show only records with a new project type. So go here under the filter we put and choose new and click OK. And then let's see if that looks. Yeah, always good to check. Yeah, that looks right. Numbers are right. The number should be right. It's based on the table, and we haven't adjusted any of them. And then this final step. This is a cool thing that I very rarely do. I almost forgot that was in this case. So we've filtered by new. Filter the table, new project types. This wants to focus on new data for new projects only. Display the records for garden design. So that's already happening. Drill down into cell C7 to show all records for garden design. So this is what they meant here. So, because you could also have a slicer or add another filter and filter by garden design here, but they're just having you filter to show new, and then to get deep into garden design, they're choosing a drill down technique. So there isn't a tool that I'm aware of, at least, on the tabs for drill down. What you would do is go to C7 and you can right click and show details, and that would offer this drill down feature, or you can just double click on C7. So if you sit on C7, which should be the same as what they have in their C7, you got to make sure, because if you've reordered these or you have these in the wrong order, then all the rest of the stuff is going to be marked wrong after that. And they have these out of order too. Well, I guess it's in the order they're going to be in. Oh, no, they don't. This is the last. No, they do. Because when you do this, it's going to put this worksheet before that one. That's why they put them in that order. So what you're going to do is just the easiest way to do this, go to cell C7 with left click, like a standard click, and just double click on it. And then it creates this drill down, which is like a phrase for digging deeper into the data. So now you've got this sheet here, and I know they need you to name it something. You've got to name these sheets. If you don't name that pivot table and you don't name this drill down worksheet, they'll just mark everything wrong because they won't be able to find the sheet. So let's name it. Copy. Show all the records of the new product type. Okay, so name the sheet. Don't move the position of the worksheet. It's totally fine where it is. And then the table design itself is table style medium 6. So this is cool because basically we make a pivot table from a table. And then when you're in the pivot table, if you want to drill down and take a closer look at something, like dig deeper, it creates another table. So we've gone from a table to a pivot table back to a table. And they want this table to have medium 6. So right there. No, dark green, wait a minute. Yeah, dark green, table style medium 6, that's it. Dark green, medium 6. And then when I noticed, and I bet I know because I looked at it. So I screwed this up the first time. So I don't know why they don't explain this, but they want this to be an A1. They don't want anything above it. But depending on your settings, it may have done that for you automatically. So if you're in A1 over to H3, you should be fine, okay? If yours doesn't look like that, and it looks like mine, even though there's nothing in this, in the instructions, it just says do the drill down, it'll make a new worksheet, rename the worksheet, apply the table style, save your file, you're done. But if yours looks like mine, you're actually not done. You need to get rid of these first 2 rows. So highlight these first 2 rows, this little thing that just tells you where it came from. Right click, delete. Okay, and now that will be marked correctly. It has to start in A1. And even though it's not in the steps, I'm hoping you watch the video right to the end so you can see that part. And now officially we are closing the file. It'll prompt me to save my changes as always. Now we are going to submit. Standard submission. There were still people on the test that were having trouble. I keep bringing that up because you guys have to, on this second test, none of the professors are going to be, we can't help you find your file. That is absolutely part of the test. So you got to make sure you're good there. Let's get this grade report. There we go. You can see that first time I submitted and I got those points off for not having it in H1 to H3. So this one's going to be 100. I already know it. So there you go, 100 out of 100. And just the one, I'm not going to call it a glitch. I mean, there's nothing wrong, but every single step is clear and definitive in terms of exactly what they want you to do, except this final step where they're failing to acknowledge that most of the computers, when you do that drill down in step 12, they're not going to put the content starting in A1 into that new worksheet. So if you had it like I had it, as I showed you 2 minutes ago in the video, you simply need to do it in A1. And that's it. So that wraps it up. And yeah, that's week 9 for you. And we got everything we covered. And I don't need to go back to the PowerPoint slides, but I will. Here they are. That's what we covered. Great job, everybody. And if you didn't get a hundo, remember, go back in the video. This video shows you exactly how to get 100%, no issues. And I'll see you next week for week 10.